What I'd like to accomplish with this is that people have an understanding of the depth of the history, and so that they know that they're not only part of something bigger, and I know that they're aware of that was successful, but now we can pinpoint some timelines and something chronological for them to understand that, whoa, this is what they did, and which is why there's so much power in the name before they got here, but why they're continuing to build a power in the name. And right now, today, the brand is stronger than ever before, and that's because of all the Firecrackers in the organization.
So like a lot of championship teams, they suffer a loss, but then they come back and then they win. So 2006, you lost to the Bat Busters. This is where you hooked me. I got into what you were doing. 2007 starts a really strong run for the Firecrackers. Talk about that 2007 team and what happened after that took you guys to another level.
Well, the 2006 team is what got us there, and getting there to that point. And again, win or lose, establish respect either way. And so the 2006 team got to the national championship game in Oklahoma, and that's always a special experience. So that was the first time we had that experience. And they did it. They made their mark. And that allowed now the 2007 team to come in with some new great players. And they repeated the experience at nationals. And so here we are against the juggernaut Bat Busters again. And who I call like the New York Yankees of softball because of their history of success. It goes back as far, the type of dominance. And if they had a Hall of Fame, because they're also an organization that doesn't put their laurels out there for everyone to see. So a lot of people don't even know the depth. Generally, some of their more profound players, but so long. So facing that team, and not that it was important to me in my heart, but understanding that it's a notch in the belt that you need to have. You need to get to you need to get over the hump. In 2006, we were winning for 6 innings and lost it in the 7th. And in 2007, we were losing for 6 innings and we won in the 7th. So those games were actually very, very close, but that's the story of the championship. But you're only known for where you finish.
Well, it helps to have a player like a Megan Langenfeld who could pitch and hit. She was that era's Rachel Garcia, if you will.
Yeah.
And she went on to great success, too. At that time, let's go back a little bit. Are you drawing in the type of talent because they like how the team is starting to win? Are you drawing them in because they like what you're doing in terms of the philosophies, the mental approach to the development of the athlete and the player?
You know, I think you could single out a lot of different areas, but I think overall there was something people wanted to be a part of. And that is the message to all of our coaches across the country, that the core principle of success in this organization are the cultures that you build. You know, when you obsess over winning and yes, trophies and accolades and different things like that, it creates influence and leverage. But when you obsess over that and you don't have a culture, it ends up being empty even when you win. So create something that people want to be part of. That's a very general description because you can fit so many different things in there. So I believe that's what started to happen. And then also we, not acquired, we were so fortunate to bring in Norm Perez and Kenny McMeechan. So the Gordon's Panthers had folded in 2005, and Norm, through our relationship competing against them, was always very cordial and respectful to me. So I'd asked those two gentlemen to, and they were loyal Panther guys. I mean, they were, so it wasn't about come over to the Firecrackers or anything, and Norm was working batting with a lot of kids. And so I just noticed they were a little displaced. They didn't have anywhere to really coach. So I asked them to come to a practice. And I remember saying it this way. I said, just come to a practice over at Los Amigos High School and don't get too close to the field. Just do like 200 yards away. And if you don't like what you see or hear, get in your car and leave. Just don't, you know, low risk. If you like it, come a little closer. So we started to incorporate them into our culture, and Norm was working with a few players on our team. So at that time, Jamia and Aaliyah Reed, Lena Correa, Kristen Areola, and these were amazing players that had already got great championship coaching from Mark Campbell. And then they also won a national championship with Doug Myers at 16 and under, Kristen and Lena did. And so they were already very, very experienced, and they were very excited to come in. So Norm Perez's relationship with some of his batting students, that's also started to create a chain through some really, really experienced, talented players, and we were really fortunate to get them on our team.
I remember at this time being attracted to what the Firecrackers were doing, and I'm sure you remember, I believe it was here in this warehouse where I came and said, can I shoot a video of you? Can we do something talking about your approach? And as I've told you many times, that was at that stage where I was in media, the most populated, the most popular video I'd ever done in terms of views. And what it was you just talked simply about how a batter should approach the plate and not being fidgety and all antsy, but having confidence. And that really struck me. It was not about what you do in terms of hitting or pitching. It was about the approach. And I think that resonated with a lot of people. And I'm interested to hear you say that you were bringing in athletes, you had an approach, a philosophy, but also you were bringing in, as an administrator, great coaches who already had relationships with strong players. And you see a lot of times the great coaches are equally successful as administrators. So do you feel at that point your coaching was more of doing what you needed to do on the field, or was it developing players off the field and letting these great coaches like Norm and Kenny do what they did?
Well, it was really supplementing our entire staff. It was supplementing all of our coaches. It was bringing in different people that did different things. We weren't looking for certain things, but we're a very inclusive type operation. So if there's somebody, so for example, after 2007, Wendy Trott's dad, Jim Trott, who had coached previously, asked me if he could be part of our operation. And I'm usually just going to say yes, like we'll figure out something. So the collection of the types of people that were coming around were definitely enhancing the operation, and it allowed me to delegate, allowed other people to take other responsibilities. It was really started to develop the network within our own team, and it started to grow. Yes, absolutely.
Let's expound a little more on the approach that some have called feng shui. It's the approach of the mental, the attitude, as I alluded to, how you carry yourself, that you're well known for, that continues to this day. Where did that come from? How did it get developed? And how have you been able to maintain that to the point that you have all these great players, the Lauren Chamberlain, Sis Bates, coming back to you? It has to be that they're happy with where they've reached their stage in life, not just in terms of softball wins.
Well, when you were mentioning about the piece that you did on the routine and the approach and how many views and just the response it got, that's so crazy to me to think about it now, because I was giving you something that was important and it was the mental part of the game. But to this day, the most viewed video on our on-demand platform is the deep breath. And so it's interesting. I would think that most people don't acknowledge that. They don't understand the importance of your routine, your breathing, different things like that. But yet, yes, they do respond to that. And I think that's very interesting. The calmness, probably because it was the biggest thing that made the biggest difference for me. The learned behavior of calming down, taking your natural reaction, taking your natural response. Everybody's got a fire. So your fire either burns too hot and you have to learn to bring it down, or your fire doesn't burn hot enough and you have to bring it up. There are very few people, if any, that have the perfect flame in life. So for me, myself, bringing the fire down. Coach George Ara, who joined us later, used to call it crisis time, and that we train and coach for crisis time. And I think it's important to identify that for a softball player, because doctors identify crisis time, in the emergency room. There's crisis time for firefighters. And so you are trained for stress. And the physical part of this game is what's glamorous, but the training that takes place at a professional level is what allows you to engage those crisis times and perform through those. So analogies are extremely important. The basketball player that takes the breath before he shoots the free throw, everybody sees that. Everybody's seen a baseball player, and softball players look at their bat, but it doesn't register with them. Once you capture that and you're able to slow things down, yeah, it calms your body down. And a calm mind, through breathing and slowing everything down, thinks at a normal pace. So an anxious mind rushes decisions, makes decisions sometimes in haste, but it's not clear in what it does. And that's all we want is clarity. We want to observe and make decisions. That's what we're ultimately trying to do. So the calm, as you use your terms, I work with players on walking heel to toe. Police officers learn command presence. It's the first thing they learn, soldiers. So walking heel to toe so that you're walking in a way that your feet, and there's a certain walk. So we have walking drills. We have pointing drills to show athletes on the field, hey, she's going this way, not, did she go this way? Everything's a projection of certainty of what you want to do. The definition of certainty, the state of being without doubt. Okay, so there it is. Now let's say you're not certain of yourself as a person. That's fine. We're training you as a softball player. As a softball player, I'm proving to you that you absolutely can be certain of your decision, because it's not about your result, And so, yeah, behavior, nobody looks for it. I've said this a million times, but everybody notices it. And you can see the response that you get when your team's in tune with their behavior.
Where did that come from for you? Here you are, the Southern California good baseball player, well brought up, but you are obviously, you were ahead of the game, ahead of the curve in the visualization, the mental edge, those type of things that now you see pro teams have these mental experts and all that. How did that become so apparent so early for you? What was the catalyst?
So great question, because the first time I saw a professional-minded baseball player was in college. I'd never seen one before. And the first thing I noticed, I was a spastic, throw it as hard as you can, run as fast as you can, swing as hard as you can, go as hard as you can, and then at the end of the night, I just lay down and watch TV all night. I didn't know anything about calmness, anything. And first time I saw a professional baseball player, minor leaguer, come back and work out in the winter. He'd go and get a ground ball, he'd toss the ball in, and he walks back to his position. Boom. He's not rushing for as many reps as he can get. And, you know, everything's calm. I'm not here to impress anybody, not here just, boom, get set, goes over, fields another ground ball, walks back to his position. And it just caught my eye. And I was like, wait a minute, there's not a swagger, that wasn't the word back in the 80s, but there was just a different presentation, and I wanted that. I wanted that. That was a different type of respect. But it wasn't sports psychology. It wasn't anything like that. When my last couple of years in college, when we heard a sports psychologist was coming out in 1987, I think my words were, a scientist is going to come out and tell us how to play baseball? What the heck did they know about what we do? Well, I was obviously candidate number one for who they should have been talking to. So there wasn't really a respect for the psychology aspect of what we're doing, but it was mannerisms and behavior. I mimic, I copy, I watch things, I model, I see things that I want that influence me, and I want to be that. I see things I don't want to be, and I never want to be that. But that's how my mind operates. So that's how that kind of came in. And then much more developed through education and things later on in the next 20 years. But yeah, the first professional baseball player I ever saw took the field, took it in a completely different way, and it struck me.
So 2006, runner-up, 2007, you win it. It's the first time you get the gold championship. You're on top of the hill, literally. What happens after that? How do you maintain that success?
Well, I wasn't looking for a different feeling. You know, there's maybe a different acknowledgement in the industry, but no, we just kept doing what we're doing. Going back to Oklahoma every year, and we started to get into, you know, a transformation of players again, and we start to run into the teams of 2010, 2011. So Hallie Wilson, Lauren Chamberlain, Janelle Linville, Kylie Lawners, Cheyenne Tarango, just a special group. And this was the first group now that really came into the Firecracker program as 10-year-olds. So I have to go even Jamie Sullivan and her dad, James Sullivan, who started our 12 and under team, and coached with Bill Jackson, who's still in the industry today with another organization. But Bill played a very important role for us in taking care of our younger players. So that core 2010 and 11 team came up from 12 and under Firecrackers, and they were the first team to really come up. And so they had that cohesiveness, and they were very, very good. A lot of autonomy, a lot of ownership. Hallie Wilson, still to this day, has one of the highest softball IQs, along with Melissa Roth, who played for us earlier. Just amazing players. You could watch them play, and you didn't have to coach them. You know, I did my thing, but they really, really took it to another level. So they were fun, and they established another level of success.
So you get into the mid-2010s, and you win another championship, 18 under PGF, with Rob Wireless helping out at this point. You have Brooke Vestal. One of my favorite stories is you tell me it's down to the wire. Brooke has the bases loaded, and Weil comes out and basically says, "What do you want to have for dinner?" And Brooke is, I think that breaks the ice, and she closes out the inning and wins the championship. Again, I think that's the ability to handle crises, like you said, or be prepared. And that team was special. Talk about that team. And one other thing I want to touch on, where I became a really advocate of you being able to get your teams to peak at the right time, was where you had Tara Blanco. And that team, remember what year that was?
So that was also the 2011 team. So that was earlier. That was our second national championship game against the Athletics. Might have been 2012. I lose the year by year sometimes. But I think those two championship games against the Athletics are significant because of the autonomy. You know, again, I've always prided myself on the ownership that our players taken to a game. So now we're even on a bigger stage. There's more people in the stands than there were in Oklahoma. We got the television coverage and everything else. And both of those athletic games came down to the last play of the game. Okay? That play goes our way, we have 2 national championships. Those plays went their way, they had back-to-back national championships. Those were significant moments because there was a little bit of difficulty for me there if I would have coached more. If I would have done what a lot of coaches do in those positions, could that have been the difference in that? That didn't matter to me back then. It didn't matter to me because that autonomy was what was most important. So those 2 games, you have to give the athletics all the credit in the world. I mean, one of the Mercado sisters came up with a big hit in the first year, and then I believe it was the young lady that went to Tennessee, last name Gear, came up the next year and hit one off of Tara. And they earned it, and it was great. But it was significant for me because I had to look back at, it's not that I second guess, but I looked at the entire group of what they deserved. It was really a weird year. That second championship game was a weird year because I wasn't sure if maybe I should have done something different. And it's the only time I might have went back. And it wasn't because I wanted one more championship. I thought if I would have done more, could they have got what I felt they deserved? So that was just interesting. They will always, again, be one of the more special teams. And it's not fair to say to all the other teams, but there was something really special about them. So that takes us back now up to Brooke Festal and coming back into, so let's enter Rob Weil. Rob Weil was with the Athletics in those 2 championship games that we lost in those earlier years. It was the way that Rob Weil coached against us that drew my interest in him. Usually my experience in championship games was a certain amount of what I call established food chain, dominance, maybe some arrogance, but not a lot of connectivity. And Rob and I actually had a really good time coaching against each other. At least that's what it appeared to be. And I would say person to person, we enjoyed it. We were playing chess with each other. So we were actually talking to each other during the game. So I just mentioned to him afterwards, if you ever are looking for another option, our door is open because I liked the way you handled yourself in championship play. So a year later, Rob gave us a call, and we brought him over, one of the most accomplished, if not the most accomplished championship coach in high school and travel ball, 13 national championships, or 12 out of 13. So we brought him in to start to manage some of the playing operations because Firecrackers Incorporated started to grow. My responsibilities started to expand, and I don't give myself a lot of business credit, but I'd like to think I was smart enough to know that I couldn't try to coach this team full-time all the time and then run the corporation. So Rob came in and was instrumental. When Rob is in the pocket, there's nobody better. I mean, when he's in that championship game and he's got the soldiers dialed in, the horses dialed in, he makes things happen. And I have a lot of respect for what he did. So let's take us up to that year with Brooke Festal coming in as the highly touted, #1 this player, #1 that player. And so it was interesting to watch that type of player now coming in with the business pressure of softball. So we won her first year, her sophomore year. Rob did his job. We had the well-known Sis Bates, and Mary Iacopa, and so we had a really, really good team. And we won that championship against the California Cruisers with Mel Sievers. And the irony there is California Cruisers now go back to 1990. That was actually the first team that I coached. So when I go back to that story of me in that first batting cage with Gene Tomaguchi, the first team I used to go out and help with their practices was the California Cruisers. So I remember going up to Mel Sievers before the championship game in 2016 and saying, Mel, we need to do something on TV for Mickey Smith. Because Mickey Smith started the Cruisers, and he is, again, Plymouth Rock of the Cruisers. So I just don't feel it's fair for us to have this national championship game and not go back to recognize the beginning of the Cruisers. So that was a fun game. It was 2-0. It was decided in the first inning. So, again, one game here, one game there, or one play here, one play there, and anything can happen, but we were fortunate. So that ended a run of 5 national championship games in 10 years, which I'm really proud of that body of work and the experience gained from 2006 to 2016 for the program.
So, again, a great run at 18 under, but the other thing that people have been impressed with the Firecrackers is you have different age divisions, not just here in Southern California within your umbrella here in Huntington Beach, but also across the country. And you've developed to how many teams do you have nationally now? And some of them are winning championships across the country.
So the expansion of the program was not a plan. It was not a business plan. I'm not capable of that. It was a demand for the product. So all this history, which again, I think this whole story is important for the organization now to be able, if they choose to, go back and hear this story, because there would be no strength to the name across their chest if not for the pioneers all the way back to the 1990s. So you take the story of this particular team, and we had other teams. We had Bill Smith, who is no longer with us, did a great job. He was always the other Firecracker team. He was actually an amazing coach. He was very good. I didn't know what I wasn't learning from him at first, and then I learned a lot from watching Bill Smith coach. We always had one or two other Firecracker teams, but now we started to get a demand for people wanting to be part of it. And so I would just say, no, we have enough teams. So say around 2009, hey, we'd like to see if we can join the Firecrackers. Nah, we're good. I was that guy. Being a single parent, loving to take care of my kids, knowing that I was paying my bills. So look at the transformation from wanting a union job, working construction. Well, when I became a single parent, all that went out the window. There was no leaving to provide. I wanted to be home for my kids. I wanted to raise them. I didn't want that take a chance on me not being there. So that changed. Now I'm able to give lessons in my backyard. I'm around the game all the time. And so, yeah, around 2009, we started to get asked. But because, hey, I was good. You know, there was no income past the month. I was living month to month until about 5 years ago. So I would just say, no, we've got enough teams. We've got enough teams. And someone else would ask, and I'd say, no, we got enough. And then I think it was Ben Pasco. I'm not sure, but I think it was Ben Pasco asked me. And I was just about to shoot him down again like I did everybody else. I was just fine where I was. And I thought, it had to be like, I don't know, your mom's voice, something. It's like, it was Tony. Why? Like, why not Ben? Ben is a stand-up man, and you like stand-up people. Like, you like to work with good people. And so why not? Is it because he hasn't won, or his teams? Like, what kind of criteria would you have? There's like a self-conversation. And I thought, Ben is exactly the kind of guy that we would like to come in. So it was Ben Pasco, it was Donnie Hagberg, Sean Brashear soon entered, Sean Quarles came in, you know, so there was the first generation of Firecracker teams came in, and now the national expansion started to happen. There was no plan for it. So the best way to describe it, as I've always said to, and this will always be part of the story, as a lot of organizations have grown since then, it was like the Wild Wild West. So people wanted to head in an area unknown for all the right reasons, but there were a lot of things that could happen. So just like the Wild West, there were scalpings and Indians and arrows and death and all types of things, and it didn't quite work out for a lot of people. Well, I would tell coaches, listen, this is a vicious business, and this name now is going to be like Walmart, like wherever it goes, you're going to be a target, and so you have to understand what's going to come with it. And so we started the whole concept of managing, the managing component of the Firecrackers, because that's really the success of this whole expansion, is you have to be able to manage people.
I didn't know there was death involved in that expansion. That's new.
You know, so you describe it in what? Sometimes it's an emotional death. Sometimes it's an experience death. I look at people and you know, if you ask coaches if they ever hear their spouse, man or woman, you know, at the end of the night go, why are you doing this? You just got off the phone again, fighting with another parent, and you know, and here you are, and you're frustrated. Why are you doing this? And to me, that's an experience death. You're not experiencing this. You know, you realize you're at Disneyland and you're angry. It doesn't make sense. And to use that analogy, you know, people may balk at the prices going to Disneyland, but how many people are sorry they went? Not many. You know, people leave with an experience, and okay, it's the cost of doing business, and that's part of business America. And that transformation too of me being out there, and you know, Rico's the first one to me about the money, and you know, even the bullets shot at me. I understand. I'm not angry. I don't hate the haters. I understand how this would look to somebody, especially somebody that's never met me or understand what this is, and you know, and this was a free entity before, you know, but we have a professional responsibility. We have a responsibility to professionalize this game because of the dollars involved with the scholarship opportunities for 90% of these kids that are going, these young ladies that are going. And so from the Wild West came the West, which is where we live now. And we are the first generation of sports business parents and coaches. So yeah, it's been different types of death. There's been physical death too, but you know, more symbolically.
You use the word brand, and I think that's interesting because it's a marketing term. But the brand, did you have concerns that as you started, and I use the word franchise because in a way you're franchising, you're trying to keep the original product intact. And as if you follow business, the most difficult stage is taking something that's mom and pop or small, taking it to a bigger level where you're going to try to replicate it. So having that Firecracker name on the jersey, if it's going to Georgia or if it's going to North Carolina or the Midwest, how did you work with the concern that the brand could be watered down, or you lose control of the brand, or there's someone out there who's rogue that's not going to represent the brand in a way that you want them to, and still keep the integrity of what you're trying to do?
Well, again, there was no business background on my part of it, so I wouldn't have known it, but all of those things happened. They happened within the development. Like all of the experiences that took place are all part of the learning curve. So the first things that were coming through, which it's not that I say they're just obvious, but they're kind of the first things that anyone would look at. So yeah, the dilution, they're not as good as your teams, And I knew, Brent, that I wasn't going to physically train Firecrackers across the country. This wasn't a championship model. Hey, let's recreate what the signature team has recreated. This was. And the word brand to me didn't mean anything. I didn't understand what it was. Gary Wardine created a unique name in the Firecrackers, created a unique logo that we could trademark. He could have called it anything, and it could have been an existing name that we couldn't have trademarked. So, again, it goes back to Gary Wardine's plan of this organization and what he brought into it. If I would have received information or feedback from college coaches and tournament directors that we don't want these Firecrackers and we don't want them in our tournaments, Brent, I didn't get that. What I got was, I can remember a Division II coach in Alabama saying, we never had a chance to get a Firecracker. We knew that we had no chance to get players off your team. And Tony, if you can pull off what the Firecrackers are most known for, which is our behavior, our mental game. I think if you asked our opponents or asked, so this isn't a self-opinionated phrase, but it's the mental part of the game. So if you could train that to your players, we're excited about the opportunity to get Firecrackers in our program. And then with tournament directors, so, again, and if you look at the stronger brands out there, the Batbusters, the Athletics, Firecrackers, Bandits, Thunderbolts, Angels, when those teams enter tournaments, it a lot of times raises the value of the tournament just a little bit. Other teams are, hey, well, they're there. And right now, the diversity and the strength across the board, it's there. It's not like our team was the only team doing well. If you look at the amount of championships, our teams have won. They've done well in national championship play. They're qualifying. So it took a few years of understanding that, look, we have to talk to people about building cultures. It's not, hey, let's win a championship this year because you have to till the land. The garden has to grow. There is no instant gratification coming into this organization. If there is, that's a little scary. That means you had something that was already built and you're bringing it in, but be careful, you might just be changing the name on the outside. So it was a slow churn of success and it took a few years. And without getting angry, because again, I never wanted this to sacrifice my experience. I have a great time and I love what I do and I deal with the tough stuff. So when something presented itself as maybe it had its own agenda or it wasn't quite, we couldn't earn the respect that we'd want to earn, then we have a conversation. And you've seen some of those coaches are now running their own organizations and they've got the opportunity to develop their own brand and do things their way. I don't wish anything bad against them because we're all part of the same community. Doesn't do us any good to wish harm and a lack of success on other people in the industry. The only place we should compete is on the field.
I remember when you started what I call the franchising, and that there was a payment plan for the athletes and the teams. It was, oh my gosh, this is going to be the death of
the Rico tax.
Yeah, I never heard of that, but
that was one that stuck with me. That was a good one.
And what's ironic is a lot of these people who are critics are now doing it, and it's like you said, you used the Disneyland example. People are paying for it. They can raise the price because it's successful. People want to be part of the experience. So you took a lot of heat. You were the first to do this, and kudos to you. You didn't scream and rant and push back a lot. You just said, this is what we're doing for us. Now you see, and I'm not saying these are the critics, but you see SoCal A's teams in Missouri, you see Texas Glory across the country, and you see just these organizations that are out of state. And they're seeing that. I think you touched upon it. If you have a brand, Firecrackers or Bandits or Bolts, or when you think Corona Angels, you think Marty Tyson and what they bring to it, competitive and strong. So I think that's raised the elevation of the sport and these brands. That's working. So I think that now we see that softball is certainly a big business, and it's growing, not just the club level, but college, and ESPN is investing a lot of money into it. When I was at ESPN, it was the fastest growing sport, and I think it continues to be. Yeah. But I want to go off in a different area now, which is, well, let's end on culture. Let's talk about, I love to use the word culture, because Marty Tyson brings a culture. If you haven't seen Marty Tyson coach before and understand that he is loved by his players and families, then you see this ranting, raving man who at 2-1 count is going to yank somebody off the field. But he has his culture, which works. And I had a very successful coach tell me one time, I want a Marty Tyson type player because I know they're going to be emotionally prepared and tough for the college world. We're seeing the Firecrackers and the success of, going back to the Lauren Chamberlains and, the Sis Bates more recently. What would you say is the culture of the Firecrackers if you had to define it?
Start with the golden rule. Treat people like you want to be treated. It gets passed up so quick, right? These are all the cliches. So, in my office, the reminders that I have on my wall, but the picture of my mom. And these are all things that just we grew up with. To thine own self be true. Be honest with yourself. Seek and thou shalt find. God helps those that help themselves. Just a lot of little things. How about the old sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me, which there's going to be, I think our grandkids are going to laugh at us, go, you guys actually had that where words wouldn't hurt you? Like, I think that's pretty amazing. They're just core philosophies of how to treat people. Because that's the foundation, Brent. That's what the roots are into. So whatever happens in the game up here when the tree's blowing back and forth, the roots are what hold that thing into the ground. So the core principles are dignity, and dignity when you lose, dignity after you strike out, integrity. The natural path for all of us is not a good path, so it's just a story. Everything is a story, so we don't take things personally. If a story repeats itself in a negative way, there's no learning. I'll take the responsibility. I haven't taught you. We haven't worked together well. Maybe this isn't good for us. But there's no negativity, and for the most part, I'll be honest with you. You go back to when we talked about the pay structure. I just knew that I wasn't going to be able to teach till 9 o'clock and 10 o'clock every night to keep this place open, and be able to answer the phone, especially on the East Coast, and be there for all the things that a lot of coaches were going to need me for. So I'm very proud of what's happened with our industry, and the average team, so you look at Marty's teams, an Angel team, that's $1 million per team in scholarship money. So there is value to what he does. If we stood back and we looked on the outside of it and said, look, these players are just playing for these guys and making them look good, and now they're capitalizing it, where in business in the world is that going to work? So there's value in a lot of these brands. The fact that every one of the top brands is different, I love, because none of us are repeating the same thing. The fact that some are a little more energetic, some are a little more calm, that is great in the big spectrum of things. I love the diversity. I'm proud of everybody that's taken on more responsibilities to try to build things. And as Jason from a coach in Texas, and a couple years ago, he says, I asked him what the latest rumor on me was in Texas, and he gave it to me. And I said, so what do you think? And he just kind of looked at me, and I said, well, don't tell him any different. Just let people believe what they want to believe. And then he was expecting me to be angry or something. I don't know. So he just kind of looked at me. And he goes, Tony, he goes, can I tell you something? I said, sure, Jason. He goes, everybody's doing what you're doing, but they still only talk about you, right? Like with the mudslinger or whatever. And so I said, Jason, I said, is that a good thing or a bad thing? He looked down, he looked back up, and he goes, that's a good thing. I said, yeah. I go, if they're not talking at all, I said, that's not a good thing. And Jason, always remember this. If you're getting an opinion of me or our team or anything from somebody on the inside, and that doesn't mean that, again, automatically I'm a bad guy. Look at their experience, but that's completely different. I absolutely understand how this looks to people on the outside. That's up to them if they want to look on the inside or not. We never ask any teams to join our organization, and our Wonder Woman administrator, Melinda Manahan, turns down close to 50 teams a year. You have to do your due diligence. We stand for something. The Firecrackers stand for something. You don't have to have the standard that we've set built in when you come to us, but you have to want to stand for something. And I implore any coach, any organization out there that is looking to be part of something bigger, because that's a big part of this too, is being part of something bigger than yourself and being part of something bigger. But don't look our way if you're just looking for a vehicle. There's no shuttle bus. Rico's not going to call for you, except if it's in the 1% of the 1% with those relationships that we have with the top coaches in the industry. We want any of our players across the country to have that access, but I'm not going to personally deliver. I'm here to manage and help guide and advise all your operations. So it's been really rewarding, Brentt.
You know, it's funny you talk about there's no bad PR, either good PR, bad PR. As long as they're talking about you, it's PR. And when I do rankings, one way I tell a player, I can tell if a player is good, is if she is a standard that everyone else is comparing their players to. For example, we've got a catcher. She's like Aubrey Monroe, and we have a shortstop. She's like Sis Bates, only she can do this better. Like, yeah, no, you can't. But I think it's as long as you're talking. My perspective on your culture is you focus on the physical on-field stuff, which is obviously, you've said many times, if you didn't have the track record of success or championships, and they wouldn't be talking about you. But I think simply that your culture is you focus on the mental and emotional health and development, and that's why you see these players coming back. In this era with social media, and that's a good thing, but it's a horrible thing in terms of social bullying, we see even some young kids in sports, out of sports, have taken their own life. So this balance, this emotional health is more important and relevant than ever. I think you'd agree. We've had this conversation. What do you think about what's happening in terms of what we need to do with athletes, the pressure? These are young girls who are super achievers and not just on the field, but in terms of academics, and they feel the pressure from their parents and teachers and coaches to succeed. How have you been able to work with athletes and adapt to these new pressures that we didn't have 20 years ago?
It's been interesting to watch that whole component and what's happened with it. So emotional health and wellness. Batbusters and Firecrackers have experienced 2 mutual suicides, players that have been in both of our organizations. It's nothing that you came in wanting to deal with or thought you were going to have to, but you can't ignore the fact that it is what it is. Having been part of this for 30 years and watching it, there's a couple things. It's not the girl's fault. It's not the player's fault. The game is still the game, and the players didn't do this to themselves. And it's not about blame, because I think that blame has been mastered in softball, because there are a lot of things wrong. There are a lot of things could be better. So we get really good at what's wrong with your swing, what's wrong with their team, what's wrong with, they do this, they do that. If parents and coaches could look at each other and go, look, we are building something from nothing. It's the Wild West. So rather than say that your town isn't built right and our town isn't built right, why don't we compare notes? And when we see something that's not working, let's give each other a heads up, because our #1 area that we work with to battle to create the emotional balance, #1 area is home, because of the constant dialogue about performance, grades, and it's different across the board. Doesn't mean all homes are not good, but that's, if we were to look at the statistics of where the imbalance starts, it starts at home, because that's the biggest tie-in for the young daughters. They're the heartstrings to dad and what's happening. And it doesn't mean that something is being done abusively. It's how, we're in an age where it's how people interpret things and the context that they take things in. So we just may be talking about finances, but if our daughter hears it in the other room and we don't realize she's thinking they are stressed because of what I need for softball, I'm doing this to my parents, almost like a child of divorce. This happened because of me. The last thing we want to do is put them in the middle for anything, and nobody's doing this on purpose. So I explained to parents, one daughter may be totally fine. She could hear this, can that, no problem. Hey, it's a tough household, fine. But we're not seeing a trend of that. Over here we have the table of happiness, and it has candy on it for kids to come in and just feel a little better and grab a piece of chocolate. And Brentt, it works. If 8 out of 10 kids I saw in here had a great social experience and things were great, it would be the table of perseverance, and probably something that would give them pain so they can deal with it. But I don't see it often enough. You have to know how your kids take things, because it's not about what you're saying, it's about how they're taking them. And that's the scary thing today. Second area is our coaching. And why is it second? Because our coaches don't go home with the kids. So a coach can do as much damage, if not more, than anybody. But remember, they're not going home with that coach. They don't live with that coach. That happens in college. So the coaching area is next. Education for parents, education for coaches on how can we professionalize what we're doing so that we're not a distraction to what they did naturally for fun when they grew up. That slowly started to disappear because we're figuring out, as the first generation of sports parents and coaches, what to do. We're not bad people for not having this figured out. But if we don't want to take responsibility. The saddest thing for me, Brentt, is that if these kids, when they become parents and coaches, if they have the same thing that we have to leave this better for the next generation. I think that's really, really important. So that part is extremely important. Being on the consortium with Sue Inquist, Mike Stith, making a difference, I think that's really, really important, and I'm really proud of that aspect of the work.
You mentioned your partnership with Mike and the BBFC events and such, and that's a growing area. What are you doing today in terms of projects? It seems like you've taken a step back from actively coaching, every inning, every practice per se, but now you are doing some bigger, maybe more transformative things. What are some of the priorities and then the big projects you have in?
Seem to be always heading in a direction of things that either are against the odds or don't make sense or this. I think I love a challenge. I love beating the odds. I love making people happy. I love helping people become successful. And who would ever thought the Batbusters and Firecrackers were going to create an alliance and we were going to work together? It is one of the most enjoyable business experiences that I have right now, working with Mike, developing together because we have a relatable story to each other. Now there are other coaches that we could talk with, but 4 years ago there weren't a lot that we could share experiences with. So we just finished the Quest of the Best Invitational at Cal State Fullerton, and we wanted to provide just a little different playing experience. We don't want to recreate something that's already out there. So it's always, again, that crossing the bridge. We had an event at the Space Coast Complex in Florida last December, and we called it the Space Coast Experience because we knew you were going to experience something, good or bad or whatever, but we wanted it to be an experience. That was a unique type event. And then we just pulled off this Quest for the Best at Cal State Fullerton, which it wasn't just that we were playing in their stadium, we created the stadium atmosphere. So we brought in the announcer, we had the scoreboard going, so there's a lot of the amenities or bells and whistles, and the players really, really enjoyed it. What's next is whatever calls us. So it might be combining the players of our organizations. Softball has done such a great job, like our organizations, of expanding to a mass. But I think with that, we need to be able to now come back in these tight little pockets. So we've got some things, some ideas on the board. And we're speaking with other great coaches of other organizations on how to collaborate.
On a macro level, are you happy with where softball is today, and where do you see it 5-10 years from now?
I never would have thought I've ever would have said I'm a very proud softball man to be part of this industry. I wouldn't even have admitted that, as a softball man. There's always these other stories of why we did this. To watch the growth of this sport, and this is not even a Firecracker thing. This is just the players at the World Series for how many years now, Brentt, they are delivering game after game. I mean, we couldn't script this thing any better. I mean, how Shane Knighton's moments, and she's like a Reggie Jackson, without the same type of notoriety. I mean, what these players have done, what these young ladies have done for this sport, and they've when I say beautified, we tell our players the most beautiful thing in the whole world is your happiness. So it's not just the brand, but the uniforms, everything, People like Robin Ferris, who's our coordinator and our national equipment coordinator, these people that love the sport and give to it and provide for these girls at the grassroots level, I could not be prouder of where we're at. All the numbers on the Nielsen's and the ratings this year with ESPN, it's proven. The interest is in the sport. It's not a nice try sport. It's not a sport-specific audience, meaning that you know somebody, which is why you're watching it. I can't even tell you how excited I am. I don't know what's around the next corner, but I can't wait to see what's around the next corner. So just tremendous credit to everybody in our industry. I could just go in an hour just naming names of people who have been part of this, but very excited.
Here's a tough question for you. Since you got into softball decades ago, how have the players changed and how have you changed?
Woo. Well, players, they are really good. I couldn't find, this is probably a conceited statement, I couldn't find 10 players that had a swing that I wanted to see in the 1990s outside of the kids I worked with. And now you can find a beautiful swing. You just get online and you can find it everywhere. This game is so well developed. There's so many people learning so many great things. And so the way the game is being played by the girls, it's kind of like MMA, female MMA fighters. It's not like this, oh, let's give them equal time for equality, gender equality. It's like, wow, look at the way that they're fighting. Look at their jabs. Look at their techniques. The game is being played amazingly by these young women, and so their training aspect of it, their dedication to it, the overall fitness level for grassroots players, it is impressive. And for me, Whew, I still have a lot of energy. I still talk all day long, but I'd say it's much more fine-tuned. There's direction to it. It's not so high and it's not so low, but it's here to fuel the world, whatever it needs to be. So I'd say that's probably it. This area here, it's hard to explain. It's the table of happiness area, and I'll get to the table of happiness, but this is, I would just say, the cheesiest collection of foam board pictures in the country. They were Xerox copies, just put up here, but they have survived the last 12 years in this warehouse. So you could go back to whether they're pictures of Mel back in the day, there's Aubrey Monroe and Jessica Plaza when Jen was doing her catching clinics in here. There's faded pictures in here. So it's not about anything contemporary, how great it is, you know, nothing. It's just another storyboard of the Firecrackers. So within the storyboard of different things here, Katie Cochran, you know, again, 4-time batting champ in college. And I love to show this picture when a girl tells me she's dropping her shoulder. And I said, look, Katie drops it every single swing. It's just that you can't pop the ball up. So a lot of great pictures here. And then we put in some of our other patriarchs. So we have a big picture here of Norm Perez. This is something that we were able to acquire after his funeral. And just a daily reminder, we have Norm's chair. Norm used to sit in this chair and sit there and watch the kids hit. Obviously, marketing is not our strength, so every now and then we put something on display from the store, a hacky sack and some sliders. Here's a picture of Coach John Dake. So John Dake's mentioned him briefly in our discussion, but again, one of the most loving men, extremely gentle man in his older years, but here he is as a vicious football player. I'm not afraid to say he's the best looking man I've ever seen. I met him when he was in his late 60s, and he just had this thing about him, and we really miss him a lot. The most important part of this table is the sign above it, and that is, it's the table of happiness. And this was made by one of our players. I told her what, she's actually in college now, but I told her what I was thinking. And the table of happiness just has, this is our version of happiness. It's candy. Sometimes there's chocolate. During the summer, we don't put as much chocolate here because nobody wants melted chocolate. But it's just something to see if we can get a response from people as they come in. So it's like our version of the water cooler. The girls will come in, and they go to it. Some girls will be like grabbing them, they'll look around if their parents aren't, but it's just this relaxed place, but there's a feeling around it. So I'll pick up the tray and I'll walk around and I'll tell people, would you like some happiness? I'll ask them, and I'll put the tray there, and they just perk up right away. And then when I go to a dad, I'll say, hold on, I go, you get happiness after you've been well behaved for 10 minutes, meaning you're not yelling at your kid or giving her instruction. So that's all this is. It creates a feeling, but you would be amazed at what one sign does and a little bit of candy. And I am not obsessive or anal about many things, but I have to have candy on this table because I remember clearly the one day that a young lady walked up here and there was only a couple pieces of candy here, and she said, this looks like the table of disappointment. And boy, I think that's the only time I had a blow to my self-esteem that day. So the girls will tell you that Tuesdays, we got to make sure that we have happiness on the table. But that's a little background, and this definitely helps create the culture in this warehouse. We turn on Motown music, country music. We have the table of happiness. When our kids are hitting on the floor, nobody's giving them instruction, nobody's talking at them, no yelling. So in the end, we have a relaxed park atmosphere. So definitely suggest to everybody to get their own version of table of happiness and a nice, relaxed atmosphere. What I'd like to accomplish with this is that people have an understanding of the depth of the history, and so that they know that they're not only part of something bigger, and I know that they're aware of that was successful, but now we can pinpoint some timelines and something chronological for them to understand that, whoa, this is what they did, and which is why there's so much power in the name before they got here, but why they're continuing to build a power in the name. And right now, today, the brand is stronger than ever before, and that's because of all the Firecrackers in the organization and now. So I just appreciate the conversation with you. You know, you and I have had a relationship that goes back more than 10 years, and so I appreciate your vantage point. You've seen the growth from the inside and the outside of the organization. You being here, I enjoy this as well, and so I just appreciate you being here and creating this experience for our people to watch, and so hopefully they will watch it and get something from it.
Pleasure to be here. Great to be with the Firecrackers. Thanks, Tony, for your time.
Thank you.